With the experience buff being released recently, for people looking to finish leveling to 40 or even starting to level a Warlock alt, it's hard not to recommend Affliction Drain Tanking as the primary open world specialization option to consider. Whether you use it with meta or haunt, your lifesteal is generally pretty insane once you have the Master Channeler rune unlocked, which for PvE is more than enough to never have to worry about pulling 1 to 3 mobs at a time, especially when grinding with strategic drain life casting. And then it only gets better as you get to a higher level when you unlock the new dot we pick up this phase, Siphon Life, once you specialize far enough down into Affliction. With your damage dots, life drains, and pet, you'll be able to farm as fast or slow as you can handle in the open world, and taking elite quests like it's no problem. Drain tanking though does lose some luster in dungeons, especially if you're attempting to spell cleave farm an SM to 40 compared to other specs like the destruction AoE spam. But it isn't unusable. Just simply switch out Haunt or Meta if not tanking for Shadowbow Volley and you'll be fine in contributing as much as you can to these groups. Your first 5 points of this build should go into Improve Corruption to make Corruption instant cast, and then from there you can change the order if you prefer a little. But I usually get 2 out of 2 Improved Life Tap, 5 out of 5 Improved Drain Life, and then I put 3 points into Suppression for some Affliction spell hit. Suppression is worth maxing to 5 eventually, especially as you get to a higher level, but if you personally don't feel you need all of the spell hit earlier on, especially if you're not fighting higher level mobs, you should still at least minimum take 3 out of 5 to unlock your higher tier of Affliction talents. From here the build will diverge a little depending on if you want to use Metamorphosis the majority of the time, and not Shapeshift for Nightfall procs, since Nightfall doesn't do anything for Shadow Cleave since it's already instant cast, or if you're just instead using Haunt. For Metamorphosis Warlocks that don't want to Shapeshift for the procs, the next batch will be taking 2 out of 3 Improved Curse of Agony, while grabbing Amplify Curse and 2 out of 2 Grim Reach, which takes you talent-wise to level 30, which will be high enough to unlock Siphon Life. If you do want the Nightfall procs though, or you're using Haunt instead of Metamorphosis, you'll take 2 out of 2 Nightfall, 2 out of 2 Grim Reach, and Amplify Curse, which again will take you to Siphon Life at level 30. From level 30 to 40 after unlocking Siphon Life, you want to finish maxing Suppression to 5 out of 5, then the next 2 points you need to spend to unlock Shadow Mastery either go into maxing 3 out of 3 Improved Curse of Agony and choosing Curse of Exhaustion, or choosing between putting the 2 points strictly into Improved Curse of Agony, or using one of them to grab Curse of Exhaustion 2 and instead going 1 out of 3 for Improved Curse of Agony. Your last 5 points for the Affliction tree are just, regardless of if you use Haunt or Metamorphosis, are going to go into Shadow Mastery. This will raise your shadow damage and drains by 10% when maxed out at 5 out of 5. Your last point, though, from leveling from 39 to 40 can go, honestly, anywhere you prefer. Some people prefer to take 1 out of 2 Improved Hellstone, some people take 1 out of 5 Demonic Embrace, there's a few rare souls out there that'll take like 1 out of 3 Improved Imp or 1 out of 5 Destruction Mana Reduction, but honestly, it really won't matter where you put this last point. Just put it wherever you want. Generally, your pet will probably be Imp for the Blood Pact and Fire Shield, or Succubus for raw physical DPS, or occasional CC for most of your leveling journey from 1 to 40. As for runes, you can get Haunt and Master Channeler very easily by level 14 when you actually learn Drain Life from your class trainer. Technically, Master Channeler would be the only required rune you'd need for this build, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to replace Haunt with Metamorphosis eventually to allow you to withstand pulling more mobs at once due to the extra armor it provides, plus giving you more mana for less life when you life tap to take advantage of all the lifesteal you're generating. Plus, you'll reduce your global cooldown usage to keep chain casting and pulling mobs faster. Haunt isn't bad though, and for me I'd say they're basically even as a choice. Just go with what you like, since Haunt is more offensive and given basically for free at the beginning of the game, while Metamorphosis is more defensive and a bit of a pain to get through, though required to be completed to get the Grimoire of Synergy later on. The rest of the runes for this phase are personal choice. For late runes, I've used Incinerate, Demonic Pack, Everlasting Affliction, and Demonic Grace on my way to 40, and I can't say I noticed any real big advantage of one over the other. Everything was useful in niche scenarios that didn't sway me to keep one on a more permanent basis instead of switching out depending on whatever content I was doing at the time. Though belt runes are in a really weird spot, since you won't be able to access them to level 30 or later. With the recent buff to Grimoire of Synergy, it may be the most useful on paper, though requiring again meta to be completed before you can even get it. But the more pressing issue I had with it was, despite the paltry damage boost it provided before being recently buffed from 5% to 25%, was that the damage increase is only for the other side. So when you proc it, your pet gets the damage buff, and when your pet procs it, you get the damage buff. Since we should outdamage our pet basically 100% of the time, I believe it's a better choice to use Shadow and Flame for the smaller yet more consistent 10% damage proc for yourself on crit. Although our dots can't crit this phase, we still fill the time we're waiting on dot ticks with enough direct damage spells like Searing Pain, Incinerate, Shadow Bolt, or Shadow Cleave that you can still proc this rune's 10% damage buff relatively consistently. Plus, comboing it with Demonic Grace could be the answer to you having naturally low crit from having no destruction talents or possibly any spell crit gear, allowing you to buff your crit chance 30% for 6 seconds every 20 seconds. So activating it before casting, say, a Nightfall procced instant cast Shadow Bolt, or for Metamorphosis players, a Searing Pain or Shadow Cleave, should help proc Shadow and Flame relatively consistently, while also providing you a 30% defensive dodge increase for 6 seconds while multiple mobs are beating on you. Other option for belt runes is pretty bad, unless you want to min-max recasting your dots in their last 6 seconds to get some minor tick burst damage using Invocation, instead of just allowing the dots to naturally run out and kill the mob while you move on to the next mob. Although Invocation could see some use in PvP, Affliction is widely considered the weakest Warlock PvP spec in Phase 2 right now, due to how bursty the PvP meta has become. Affliction locks generally can compete in group PvP where we get focused a good portion of the time yet have very few defenses to save ourselves, yet our offensive spells require 15 to 24 seconds spread out across over 4 to 5 global cooldowns per target to reach full potential, when most classes can burst each other down in 5 to 10 seconds with 2 to 3 global cooldowns. Although Affliction can still work for 1v1s, open world ganking, or duels. Lastly, when you're mid-30s to high 30s, you'll want to look into getting Demonic Knowledge for your boot rune. Feel free to unlock the others, but for this build, Demonic Knowledge as well as Master Channeler will be one of the few never remove once unlocked runes that you will use. Also as a reminder, in the intro, if you are in a situation where AoE is needed, feel free to switch over to Shadow Bolt Volley to fill your AoE needs. For spell rotations, depending on your playstyle, they're similar but do have some minor differences. For the Haunt style players, it's a good idea to open Haunt and then Curse of Agony, and then apply Drain Life after you make sure Haunt is applied to make sure you get the 20% damage modifier, and then just finish casting the rest of your shadow dots. Drain Life is a special dot for some reason and won't adjust to the 20% modifier if it is cast on a mob before Haunt is applied like the rest of the dots like Corruption and Curse of Agony do. So be sure again to always remember to let Haunt apply before casting Drain Life. And always try to line up Haunt first, then Drain Life on the highest HP mob to maximize your life drains. Lastly, work in Nightfall procs on either the lowest HP enemies if it would kill them in one hit, or your highest HP enemies to start knocking their HP down and let your dots work quicker, if there aren't any quick kills available. And you can even wand low HP enemies as a quick bit of free burst while you're waiting for your dots to tick down. However, if you're using Metamorphosis, you'll generally want to pull with one of your instant cast dots, generally being Curse of Agony since it has the longest build-up time, but then prioritize casting Drain Life and your dot rotation as soon as the mob or mobs come into range, and then lastly applying any other shadow dots that you haven't applied yet, and then throwing in Searing Pains or Wanding to speed up the kills and picking off low HP targets. Or, if you're pulling multiple mobs, working in the Shadow Cleave again as well once they're grouped up in melee range, in between you're applying your dots and refreshing your Drain Lives. Like with Haunt, try to apply Drain Life to your highest HP mob to maximize the amount of time you get life draining. And then finally, for both styles, try to let your dots finish off the mob to maximize your mana efficiency. So like when your dots have like 5 seconds left and the mob has like 5% HP left, go ahead and start casting your dots on the next mob. That way you're constantly moving along and you're not wasting time waiting for those dots to finish that mob off, because by the time the other mob runs to you, that mob will have died and you'll be ready to generally fight that new mob. And you just keep doing that to keep the chain pace pull going. Finally, for gear, if you aren't already geared to the 9s from playing previously in Phase 1, you can always look to BoE Shadow Spell Power Greens at all level brackets, crafted items like Hands of Darkness, Invoker's Belt, and Invoker's Shoulder pieces, Lesser Magic Wand and Greater Magic Wand for the road to 25, and things like Shadow Weave, Mage Weave, or Black Mage Weave pieces, just to name a few, on the road to 40. Don't have a good Shadow Wrath Green or crafted item to put in a slot, or they're too expensive for you to afford? Then try to grab some dungeon drops for your level range, some stamina gear or eager gear to replace it with. There is even a nice green wand from enchanting at level 33 you can get called Greater Mystic Wand that gives you plus 5 doll spell power. And it will be very useful to use until you can get or have the desire to farm the Scarlet Monastery rare boss, Ashira the Sleepless, and the wand is called the Necrotic Wand that he drops, or other drops that you get from Nomer, or farming out the BOE spell power green. And even with all that, there's also the fact that there are still plenty of BFD pugs out there that are accepting almost anyone from my experience that you can join on the road from 25 to 40 and try to grab some of that sweet loot in there on reset while you're leveling up. Hopefully this guide has given you a few tips that you may not have known or other avenues of play you may not have even considered before. And if you have any other questions, comments, criticisms, or even want to tell me some mean things, why don't you hit up the comments below. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video enough, why not throw us a sub to see our future Warlock content. Thanks and have a good night.